Hi there. Welcome to part 15 of my series going over every single track in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. We are almost on our way to Upper Junon, but we've got one last episode's worth of spatially lower tier tracks to grind through first. Let's get to it. Cloud and company are still coming off the high of Stamp's theme from the last episode, as we finally reach the far side of the Junon region in the small settlement known as Crow's Nest. Immediately, our first track of today starts up. You're listening to, ostensibly, the Crow's Nest theme. To my ears, it isn't calling back to any pre-existing Final Fantasy VII tracks, nor even any of the new remake or rebirth themes. This piece has its own clearly defined melodies and ideas, although from an arrangement perspective, it shares some commonalities with the two versions of Under Junon we covered in parts 13 and 14. Like the Under Junon track, we continue to elaborate on the more bluesy, down-to-earth instrumentation choices, throwing in a banjo, a lead mandolin, and a bluegrassy electric slide guitar. Once again, we are very much, quote-unquote, with the people, as the track evokes a more working-class image than the more regal and militaristic main Junon region track we covered in Part 12, or the many tracks we'll cover in Upper Junon in the episodes to come. But the electric guitar and deeper percussion contribute to something with more edge and bite than the Upper Junon tracks. Considering how much stronger and calculated the anti-Shinra sentiment is in Crow's Nest, what I'm considering as working class sounding might be more accurately described as revolutionary sounding. Texturally, the instruments are similar to the Under Junon tracks, but the intent has a bit more drive or purpose, and the similarities make sense thematically as well. In the Japanese version of Rebirth, Crow's Nest is known as Side Junon, which I think is a crucial detail that further elevates this track as an important piece of the entire Junon region soundscape. We have the naval and militaristic Junon region track, the more relaxed, perhaps resigned reality of the Under Junon tracks, and now, finally, the early smoke of rebellion taking shape inside Junon. If, like the Junon region and Under Junon pieces, this is a Yoshinori Nakamura track, which I think it is considering the similarities in instrumentation, I would be interested in hearing him discuss his process of bringing these three pieces of music to life. I wonder if when he was sketching these tracks out, they might have been more explicitly connected, musically speaking. I would love to hear a full Junon suite someday that weaves together these various Junon passages into one complete picture of the region. I'll throw that challenge out to anyone here watching or listening that does their own Final Fantasy covers and remixes. I considered taking a stab at it myself, but I don't really have time for that right now. Definitely leave a comment with the link to it if you decide to take a shot at it, though. I'd love to hear it. Exploring Crow's Nest, we eventually meet a very musical man named Dorian, most likely named after the Dorian mode. Anyhow, Dorian is a member of the Piano Outreach Association, and he's always on the lookout for excellent pianists. No, not Cloud, Tifa. He hands you your first piece of sheet music, and it's On Our Way, the town theme we covered back in Calm in episode 6, and once again in the Under Junon Hotel in episode 13. This here is a third arrangement of On Our Way, and as you can probably guess, this is a piano-only arrangement. The Piano series has a long history of piano arrangements albums that follow the release of their games. These arrangements were typically pretty inspired, with a lot of creative embellishments left at the discretion of the arranger. So of course Final Fantasy VII got its own piano arrangement album in 2003, which comprised of 13 beautifully arranged pieces by Shiro Hamaguchi. Some of these versions of the tracks would eventually show up in Advent Children and even in Remake. So a logical assumption would be that they took those old piano arrangements for this piano minigame, but that is not the case, and for good reason. Those older arrangements are meandering, full of unexpected syncopation, and have a more natural tempo that ebbs and flows at the whims of the pianist, as opposed to following a strict metronome. All things that would be absolutely maddening in a rhythm game, which are typically programmed to be much stricter and rhythmically conventional than a natural solo piano performance. So as a result, this Rebirth piano arrangement of On Our Way, understandably, doesn't hold too many surprises. It's a clean, brief, and to-the-point arrangement that works just fine as the beginner level of this minigame. And you can tell the rhythm is locked to a set tempo, since at the start of the level, but also whenever you mess up, they bring in a metronome to help you find your rhythm again. And speaking of how that metronome can dynamically fade in and out, it's interesting to note how the game's sound engine reads this track, because it's pretty unique. The vast majority of tracks are controlled by the music slider in the settings, with the occasional diegetic track, such as in-world radios or live performances, being controlled by the sound effects slider. But this track is controlled by both. The rhythmic section is controlled by the music slider, but the melody, i.e. the actual part that you play with the minigame, is controlled by the sound effects slider. One of the reasons the performance is divided this way is because of how the game is processing the audio. While the game lets you control Tifa's left and right hands with the two analog sticks respectively, there is an additional layer of left hand playing, which you don't directly control, that plays the expected underlying chords and arpeggios that complement the melody you are literally playing. If you don't press any buttons, Tifa still plays that section. But that section isn't entirely static. When the track first starts, you can hear the metronome to help you along. Once you approach a 20-note combo, the game figures you've found your rhythm, so they fade out the metronome. As your combo continues to climb, they add more complexity to that left-hand performance. It's more energetic playing with more complicated phrasing. If ever you do miss a note, they drop you back down to the version of the track with a simpler left-hand arrangement, as well as the metronome. So you are indirectly controlling 3 different dynamic background music layers during this minigame, and then, on top of that is the actual minigame. As the notes slide into position on screen, it's you who controls whether or not we hear the right chords and notes. This is entirely granular, meaning if you miss a note, you don't hear it. And if you're even slightly off, it'll sound slightly off. Each note here is its own audio file that you are triggering. What's cool about this approach is that every time you do this minigame, even if you get a great on each note, it'll still sound slightly different from one performance to the next, unless you have superhuman rhythm, but that would be boring. This sort of per-note audio trigger system is something you see in a lot of higher-end rhythm games like DJ Max Respect. It's a level of detail you can't get in rhythm games that simply use a static piece of pre-existing music. I love the Final Fantasy Theatrhythm games, more than just about anything, but since those games just use static audio tracks from prior FF games, your performance has no impact on what the music sounds like. So it's kind of wild just how much detail they put into this entirely optional minigame in Rebirth. While I don't love playing it, from a technical standpoint, this is kind of a world-class rhythm game engine they've put together. Huge kudos. Anyhow, All these piano tracks made it onto the Gold Saucer and minigame disc they released last year, which means I can tell you that this On Our Way arrangement was done by Hidenori Miyanaga. I hadn't heard of him before, but he's been in the industry for decades, mostly as a sound designer and sound director, but in more recent years he's moved over to the music side of things. To Final Fantasy fans, perhaps his most illuminating role is as the full-blown music director for all 6 Final Fantasy Pixel Remaster games, where he also doubled as one of the many arrangers on those projects. Of the half dozen or so tracks written for this piano minigame, this is the only one that Miyanaga arranged. Not just that, it's his only arrangement credit across all of Rebirth. Granted, we won't be sure that it's his only arrangement until we get the Plus soundtrack, but if it is, that's a pretty unique position to be in. This would be the first arranger we've covered so far that was relegated to just one song. Will he hold that record for the whole game? Only time will tell. The piano is not the only diegetic instrument in Crow's Nest. Traveling a bit further east into town, you'll come across the bluesy guitar player known as Neil, who just happens to be your next Queen's Blood opponent. If you idle next to him long enough, you'll hear Neil's autobiographical story of how, with Queen's Blood and his guitar, he's gonna be a star. It's a bog standard 12-bar blues jam, but the inclusion of a diegetic vocal track is an interesting inclusion. Like the piano track we just covered, this one also has 2 different audio sliders controlling the music, although this time it's the sound effect and voice sliders. Interesting to see 2 very non-standard implementations of music in Rebirth back to back. When you talk to Neil, it triggers a unique outro to the track as well, as opposed to just fading it out. Nice touch. What's also cool about Neil's singing being controlled by the voice slider is that his singing is no different from any other dialogue sound clip in the game, meaning not only do we have an English and a Japanese version of this song, we've got a French and German version as well. So yeah, don't expect this one showing up on the Plus soundtrack anytime soon, but it's cool to see it. I hope you've been staying on top of your Queen's Blood playing, because once we've finished with Neil, there's only a few folks left to play against in the entire Junon region. There's one guy in particular that's of interest to us, and as luck would have it, he's in Crow's Nest as well. A few steps away from Neil is Cameron, another Queen's Blood player with an ego the size of Midgardsormr. There's nothing too special about the match itself, but what happens next is plenty mysterious. Cloud, at this point in Rebirth no stranger to cryptic visions, has another one. This time, a mysterious man sitting at a table atop a life-sized game of Queen's Blood stammers on about something being wrong as a deep dread matches some sort of realization on the nature of the game. Wow. What a wild scene, and the accompanying piece of music perfectly accentuates the man's anxieties. We have a cornucopia of dissonant horror stings with no clear forward momentum. I feel like I'm playing Dead Space or something. The only sort of anchoring I can find in this piece is the siren-like synth that bookends the piece. Does it sound familiar to you? Because we heard the exact same sound back in episode 9, during the resolution of Brodin's Windmill side quest. Interesting. Any thematic connection between that scene and this one here? I honestly don't know, since, as I've mentioned in a previous episode, during my first playthrough of Rebirth, after about chapter 6 or so, I stopped doing most of the side quests, including Queen's Blood, in an attempt to make it to the end of the game before the Rebirth Orchestra show last year. As such, I'm not being tongue-in-cheek when I say I don't know if there's any connection here, or even what this cryptic Queen's Blood scene is actually trying to tease. Whatever it is, I am definitely intrigued. As a result, I don't know how much to read into this particular track and whether it's the start of some sort of theme or not. There are a few sparse notes in there that may or may not hint at some later track. But for now, we'll just have to put a pin in it. There are a few side quests we can pick up in Crow's Nest. The first one involves nourishing the majestic condor, all while getting a picture-perfect snapshot of the bird. The area where you speak to Colin, the quest giver, is in a raised region of Crow's Nest, where you can look out and see the condor guarding his fort. In this elevated region of Crow's Nest, it subs out the area's theme for A Condor Passage, the track we covered in episode 12 and 13. I won't spend too much time on this track a third time, but I will say that Crow's Nest, as an anti-Shinra base, has a similar narrative function as Fort Condor does in the original game. So playing the Fort Condor theme here makes a lot of sense, and since we seemingly can't go to the real Fort Condor in Rebirth, this is probably the closest we can get, narratively and musically. Colin tasks us with finding a suitable feast for the bird. You track the scent of a cow, which eventually leads you to a creepy lair known as the Wormhole. A somewhat nondescript tension track begins to play on approach. I really don't have much to say about this one. It sounds fine. The mix is rich enough. It's devoid of any real melodic ideas, which means it could fit into just about any tension-filled scene in the game, or any game really. It reminds me a bit of Encroaching Fear from Final Fantasy XV, which similarly played while approaching an enemy. That track's inclusion of the classic Final Fantasy battle bassline means it has more personality than this Wormhole track though. I don't know, I'm mostly grasping at straws here. Let's keep moving. Once we spot the Mystic Dragon inside the cave, the ensuing battle plays the remake track, Let the Battles Begin, Break Through. We've covered other versions of Let the Battles Begin from Remake, which plays whenever fighting open world intel, but this one has some very interesting wrinkles. Both A Merc's Job and Breakthrough were arranged by Shotaro Shima, but A Merc's Job is much more faithful to the 1997 original than Breakthrough, which deliberately misleads you with melodies that almost match the original and more ambiguous chord progressions. Passages that completely deviate while still referencing and evoking the original. Honestly, the way Shotaro Shima introduces the player to Let the Battles Begin in Remake is so masterful. He really makes you work for the theme. And Breakthrough's not even his first swerve. Earlier on in Remake, he introduces the theme with Let the Battles Begin, Ex-Soldier, my favorite version of the track. Here, the main melody is lifted by beautiful, almost melancholic strings that obfuscate and misdirect the intensity and determination of the ascending melody. Ex-Soldier? Really? You sure about that? Anyhow, when Breakthrough shows up in Chapter 2, an hour or so later, our expectations for a faithful version of Let the Battles Begin is almost immediately dashed. You have to make it to the end of Chapter Boss to finally get the classic version of Let the Battles Begin. This is technically included as the outro to the Breakthrough track on the Remake original soundtrack, but musically it's no different from A Merc's Job, which we've already covered. For this battle, however, Breakthrough never reaches the faithful A Merc's Job section from the original. It just loops the more ambiguous main section. Fun track. There's also a blink and you miss it nod to Hurry in there too. That Hurry reference made a bit more sense in the original game, where you are dashing to get away from the Shinra troops chasing you after you did an eco-terrorism oopsie. Chasing a cow in a cave so you can cook up a nice steak for a rare bird is maybe not quite as pressing. Or maybe it is of utmost importance because resolving the quest raises your relationship with Tifa, which is, ultimately, the most important thing in the world. Alright, we've got one last side quest to get to in Crow's Nest. Some folks in town want us to deal with an obnoxious, self-proclaimed mercenary that set up shop in Junon's beautiful lighthouse. So we set out, with the goal of ideally cracking a few skulls. Stepping outside the town's southern exit, instead of playing the regular Junon region field theme, we now get Eager Soldier, one of the 3 versions of the Final Fantasy VII main theme we covered back to back, all the way back in episode 3. Frankly, I'm a little annoyed they bothered to use this track back in Chapter 1, because it really lessens the impact of hearing it here. This is a fantastic Shima arrangement of the main theme, with awesome banjo and electric guitar, but in my opinion, in that Chapter 1 sequence, it was completely eclipsed by Toward Mount Nebel, and what I call 007. Both of which sandwiched Eager Soldier. But playing it here, however, is a breath of fresh air. We are potentially a half dozen hours removed from variations of the main theme at this point in Chapter 4, so it's a welcome inclusion and a reminder that, yeah, the world map should play the main theme from time to time. But that's all I'll say about it. It also plays the dynamic battle variant when you encounter enemies out here, which is also cool. Play the dunk 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 dunk. If it wasn't obvious who we're about to meet, they spell it out for us once we reach the base of the lighthouse, as Kyrie's theme begins to play. Speaking with her up in the lighthouse, Kyrie reveals to us she's written a song to attract new customers to her exploitative mercenary business. The problem is, the only customers who seem to be falling for her aggressive advertising are big, nasty monsters. This is New Mercantown, our latest vocal track and the 3rd diegetic track of this episode alone. This is a big, goofy track, obviously riffing on the rhythm section from Tony Basil's classic Mickey. If you Google it, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. But with none other than Kyrie's voice actor herself singing the track. In the Japanese version, this is Sumire Uesaka, who seems to have an actual singing career along with her prolific voice acting credits. She does a great job towing the line between sounding a bit obnoxious, since that's Kyrie, and sounding pretty good. Just like Kyrie's main theme from episode 9, it's sort of a tough track to judge. It's a little grating, but that's also the point. So, top marks, I guess? And this is an arrangement of her theme, by the way. You can make out the main melody pretty clearly here. The tenor saxophone in the mix sounds great too, and adds some character to an otherwise pretty derivative groove. Oh, and I love the chanting chorus. That part's just fantastic. Some nice luscious reverb on her voice there, and it really elevates the track from grating but catchy to grating but kind of good though. As rightly pointed out by several commenters throughout the series, I've been bad about highlighting the English versions of Mitsuto Suzuki's vocal tracks. I'm recording this playthrough in Japanese, so I oftentimes forget to go back and redo sequences with the English audio to see if it sounds any different. For example, in part 10 I covered Akira's 3 vocal tracks in Japanese, and it wasn't until a commenter pointed out to me that, yeah, there are English versions of those as well.
That's always on my mind. See you later, it's time we go our separate ways. See you later, I'm sure we'll meet again someday. In this moment, let me feel you close to me while I still have a chance.
Hey, it's cool it exists. I think the English version of the Kids Choir and Stamp Rebirth sounds great though. So crisp. Anyway, that brings me to our current Kyrie track, which in the English version is sung by her English voice actor, Erica Harlacher. Yeah, this is a wild performance. She's very much doing the obnoxious Kyrie voice, which, yeah, that's the whole point, and I think she sells it completely. I hate it. It's perfect. Harlacher arguably does an even better job than Uesaka at selling the performance and how I think you're supposed to feel in the scene. And no, this isn't a dig at the voice actor. While she doesn't have an extensive music career on the side, she has on occasion written and performed her own music as well, in case you needed proof that her Kyrie voice is, obviously, performative. And of course, the reverby chorus chant is just as rich and lush in her version. All told, it's a fun track and works especially well during the battle sequence. Cool stuff. Alright, we are done with Crow's Nest. It's time to head back to Under Junon, but before we can speak to Priscilla about her plan to get us topside, we've got one last side quest to enjoy. Visiting the local quest board, we can find a cryptic, ribbity quest with our name on it. The quest leads us to a very toxic area where things appear quite strange. The kids have transformed into frogs. And not just the kids. Before you can say Maiden's Kiss, you too are transformed into a frog. Or is it a toad? The music for this quest and area is called Jump Frog Whirligig Whack, and Mitsuto Suzuki is back with another zany track. This time with a bouncy, largely chiptune style arrangement, punctuated by a voice saying, "Gero gero." Pretty goofy, and musically pretty different from just about anything we've heard before in Rebirth. Once we reach Gold Saucer, we'll hear Suzuki explore this sort of retro 8-bit sounding arrangement style once again, but for now it's pretty singular. I decided not to go on a deep dive trying to figure out who's singing the "Kero Kero" line, like I did with the many vocalists in the last episode. I apologize if you were waiting on me for that lore nugget. Until proven otherwise, I'm just going to assume it's Suzuki pitch shifting his own voice or something. While this track plays during the cutscene and battle in this Mako-drenched area, you are likelier to remember it as the titular track that plays for hours and hours and hours as you try to reach the top score in the Whirligig Whack minigame. Something I think maybe doesn't get enough consideration when designing somewhat jokey tracks for minigames is that, like, The gag is funny at first, but with the difficulty level of some of these minigames, you are bound to find yourself listening to these types of songs way more than you do the multi-part dynamic boss battle tracks that you hear once and never again. I listened to this track for over an hour straight when trying to reach that 1 minute and 20-second high score. And if it isn't the piece of music I've heard the most in Rebirth, it's one of the other hard as nails minigame tracks. So I guess my pitch, or plea, to music supervisor Keiji Kawamori and game director Naoki Hamaguchi is that, for part 3, I hope the minigame tracks are given a tiny bit longer to cook, or even just making them 5-minute loops instead of a minute and a half, such as the case in this one, just so that the musical ideas don't repeat quite as often. It's like a perfect mirrored reflection of the Kyrie track we just covered. In that track's case, I think it's a not great song that is used excellently in game. In the case of Jump Frog, it's a great track that's stretched way too thin in game. Anyhow, part of what makes it so maddening is that the track is constantly restarting, since every time you get knocked off the platform, it cuts to the results music. This track is fundamentally the same piece of music, but a bit more succinct, I guess. Just like the last piece, you're likely to hear this track a whole bunch too. Oh, and don't even think about just not doing this side quest. Oh no. You need to do this one to raise your relationship with Tifa as well, so yeah, it's mandatory. Okay. We've stalled as long as possible, but sooner or later, it is finally time to make our way to Upper Junon. It's time to talk to Priscilla and her dear friend, Mr. Dolphin, to figure out just what exactly they have in mind. The plan is to have Mr. Dolphin give Cloud a boost, and to do so we've got a nice little minigame ahead of us. Man, what is it with Under Junon's animals that musically transport you to a completely different time period? First, Salmon the dog and his Dreamcast fever dream. Then the 8-bit sounding frogs, and now a dolphin that brings to mind the blue ocean bliss of 1996's Wave Race 64? Dolphin Show is an utter joy to listen to. You can practically feel the salty mist on the breeze with its clean, unbusy mix. The lead synth is immaculate, the strings and drum kit are neatly compartmentalized, and then they bring in that clean acoustic guitar lead right out of the Wii Sports playbook. Everything just sounds good. Gabriel Gundaker write this track? No, it was Shoya Tsunakawa, whom we covered all the way back in part 2 with his Zangan's theme. I also posited that the Gilgamesh track we covered in part 12 was Tsunakawa, but that one's far from confirmed, so let's ignore it for now. Between Zangan's theme and now Dolphin Show, we are seeing quite a bit of range from Tsunakawa, not just as an arranger, but as a composer as well. The two tracks are nothing alike, and both sound pretty different from just about every other Rebirth track we've covered so far. I figure this is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to Tsunakawa's range, but we'll just have to see. I quite like this track, though I don't have too much to say about it. Unlike the Jump Frog track, which, in my opinion, greatly overstays its welcome, this one is over all too soon. Doubly so because this minigame is one and done. If you're not happy with your performance, too bad. It won't be until Chapter 12 that we get to have another stab at this minigame, or this track. That, or you can buy the Gold Saucer and minigame soundtrack. Once Mr. Dolphin successfully launches Cloud up onto the suspended ship, the music dynamically crossfades an entirely new arrangement of the same piece of music. We've left the sort of upbeat, easy listening / Muzak sound of the Dolphin minigame and shifted over to a more stripped down piano arrangement with a cymbals heavy bossa nova inspired beat. frankly, I'm all for more bossa in video games. Put some bossa in every game. Uematsu got the memo all the way back in 1997 when he composed the Costa del Sol music, but that's not enough. I need more. Square Enix just announced the Final Fantasy VII Rebirth Acoustic Arrangements album, and if it's anything like the one they did for Remake, it's gonna be good, but I bet it's gonna be seriously lacking in bossa nova arrangements. So I'm glad we've got breezy, carefree tracks like this one to tide us over until we get to Costa del Sol in Chapter 6. While you could easily argue that this is a continuation of the Dolphin Show track, because the Gold Saucer and Minigame Disc excluded this portion from the Dolphin Show track, I'm going to follow their lead and treat it as a separate track as well. And as Cloud helps the rest of the crew up the ship, we are finally ready to head to Upper Junon. We are only about halfway through Chapter 4, but I'm treating this vertical milestone as a symbolic mid-chapter break. Let's take a look at the spreadsheet. By my rather subjective count, we've covered about 40 tracks so far. About half of those have been released on the various Remake and Rebirth soundtracks, leaving us with about 20 unreleased tracks. Anyway, that's my count, but your own number might be more or less depending on how you decide to divide up the tracks. Really, all you need to know is it's a lot. Alright, that's it for today. The next video coming up won't be Rebirth, but instead a one-off video celebrating the music of Bloodborne, which turns 10 years old next week. Happy birthday, Bloodborne. Please look forward to that. There's a lot to cover in that game. And speaking of a lot, we have now hit 2,000 subscribers here on YouTube. Many thanks to everyone for tuning in and subscribing. It took about a year of making music analysis videos for my channel to reach 1,000 subs, and then about 3 months to get 1,000 more. I'm no math guy, but that looks like good progress to me. Similarly, the last video did quite well for me and led to about 4 new patrons, each one of which I'm hugely grateful for. The amount of folks who can back my Patreon is a massive factor in just how much time I can afford to spend on making these videos. I've also had a few folks reach out to say they want to support me financially with a one-off donation without having to join Patreon. If you are not aware of this, YouTube lets you do exactly that. Just under this video and all of my videos, there's a thanks button where you can donate as much or as little as you want. That's pretty cool if you ask me. Alright, that's it for today. So keep your eyes peeled for that Bloodborne video coming soon, and afterward, we return to Cloud and company as they venture forth into Upper Junon. Until then, take care. Bye.